The trauma doors burst open at exactly 12:07 a.m. A stretcher stormed in, a body drenched in blood. Paramedics shouting vitals over each other. Male, mid-20s, high-impact collision on the N1, massive internal bleeding, BP dropping. The emergency unit at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital erupted into controlled chaos. Monitors beeped violently. Nurses moved like clockwork. Someone cut away his shirt. Someone started suction. Someone shouted for O-negative blood. But I didn't hear most of it, because the moment I saw his face, my stomach dropped. It was him. Not similar, not close, exactly him. The same bruising pattern I had seen in my dream, the same cut above his eyebrow, even the faint scar near his jaw. For a second, the room tilted, but I forced myself forward. I pulled on my gloves slowly. Steady hands, surgeon hands. I leaned over him. His eyelids fluttered, and then he looked at me. Recognition. Not confusion. Recognition. I swallowed. Dennis, right? I asked quietly. His breathing was shallow, but he nodded faintly. A nurse looked at me, puzzled. You know him? I ignored the question. My name is Dr. von Andries, I said calmly. You remember speaking to me a few hours ago? Shock flooded his eyes. He tried to speak. No sound came out. His blood-stained hand reached weakly toward my gown, the same way he had reached for me in the dream. But before he could form words, the anesthetist nodded. Sedation in. His body relaxed, and just like that, he slipped away from consciousness. Inside the operating theatre, the air felt heavier than usual. The bright surgical lights felt interrogative, almost accusing. We opened him up. Severe abdominal trauma, ruptured spleen, internal hemorrhage, exactly as I had seen before. I gave instructions mechanically. Clamp, suction, more blood, charge to 200. Again. We fought for him for hours. At 2:59 a.m., his heart rhythm began to destabilize. At 3:11 a.m., it flatlined. We shocked him. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The room grew quieter with each failed attempt. At 3:17 a.m., I looked at the clock. The same time. The exact same time from my dream. My chest tightened. I removed my gloves slowly. I'm calling it, I said, my voice hollow. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. Silence filled the theatre. Not the usual respectful silence, a different kind. My surgical nurse was the first to speak. Dr. Von... Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was disturbed. How did you know? Another staff member stepped forward. You said his name before checking his file. You asked him about a phone call. How did you know this surgery was coming? Their eyes were fixed on me, waiting. My mouth went dry, because I didn't have an answer that wouldn't make me sound insane. I forced a scoff, a weak one. I have to go, I muttered. Go where? Someone asked, alarm creeping into their voice. But I was already walking, still in my scrubs, still stained. I pushed through the double doors, down the corridor, past the nurse's station, ignoring the whispers that followed me as I yanked off the scrub and dumped it in a trash can. My pulse was pounding in my ears. It wasn't over. There was more. When I unlocked my car at the parking lot, my hands were shaking. I slid behind the wheel and drove. By the time I arrived at Kruger National Park, the sun was already high up. Tourists poured in through the gates, laughing, taking pictures, adjusting hats and sunglasses. Families, couples, children pointing excitedly at safari maps. Everything seemed normal, as it should. I knew I was supposed to wait near the main gate, so I positioned myself there. scanning every incoming vehicle. I drove 5 hours down there, 5 hours rehearsing what I would do, how I would convince them. And then I saw them. Mr. Lungile, grey at the temples, animated hands, laughing loudly at something his wife said. Mrs. Lungile walking gracefully beside him. And Liezel, radiant, real. For a second, my knees weakened. She wasn't a dream. She was breathing, standing 10 meters away from me. And if I did nothing, she would die before sunset. I moved toward them, fast, too fast. I shoved past tourists without apology. Someone cursed at me. Another person stumbled, but I didn't care. Time was collapsing in my head. Every second felt like a countdown. "Excuse me, sir," a woman shouted behind me as I brushed past her. I ignored it. My eyes were locked on Liezel. She hadn't seen me yet. Good. I needed to reach them before they boarded the safari vehicle. I was close now, close enough to hear Mr. Lungile's booming laughter. And then, rough hands grabbed my arms, hard. Security. 2 uniformed men. "Sir, what's your problem?" one barked. "I need to speak to them," I shouted, struggling. "You don't understand." I twisted violently in their grip, and finally, Liezel looked up. Our eyes met. Recognition didn't exist in hers, only confusion. "Liezel!" I yelled. "Mr. Lungile! Mrs. Lungile!" Tourists turned, phones came out. The scene was already becoming spectacle. "Do not go on the tour," I screamed. "Please, it's not safe." Mr. Lungile frowned, protective instinct rising. Liezel stepped slightly behind her father. To them, I was just another madman on the street. Security tightened their hold. "Sir, you're causing a disturbance." "I'm trying to save their lives," I roared. They dragged me away as I fought uselessly. They threw me into a small security holding room near the administrative offices. Metal chair, wooden desk, one ceiling fan rotating lazily. One officer stood in front of me. "Start talking," he said flatly. So I did. I told him everything. The midnight crash on the N1, the surgery, the phone call, Dennis dying at 3:17 a.m. As I spoke, my own story sounded insane, even to me. The officer exchanged looks with his colleague. Then they laughed. Not cruelly, but dismissively. "You drove 5 hours because of a dream?" one said. "Yes." "You assaulted tourists because of a dream?" "Yes." They shook their heads. "Doctor or not, you're unstable right now." One leaned closer. "Listen carefully. Remove yourself from this park, immediately. If we see you near that family again, we will arrest you." I felt something inside me collapse. "Time is running out," I whispered. And then something shifted in me. A quiet, terrifying resolve. My eyes drifted to the table beside the officer, and that's when I saw it. A revolver, carelessly placed, unlocked, unsecured. The universe had just given me a choice. Before I could reconsider, I lunged. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal. I turned and pointed it straight at the officer. The room froze. Silence. Pure, stunned silence. The officer's hands shot into the air. The other stepped back slowly. "Sir, think about what you're doing." "I have thought about it," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Take me to one of your vehicles, now." "By now that family is deep in the reserve," he replied, fear shaking his words. "I don't care," I barked. "Grab the keys." The barrel of the gun didn't waver. My heart was pounding so violently I could hear it in my skull. He slowly reached for the keys hanging by the wall, picked them up. "Easy," he muttered. "Move," I ordered, and within minutes we were heading into the wild, chasing a nightmare that was already unfolding. It took nearly 30 minutes of driving through uneven terrain before we finally saw them. The safari vehicle, tiny in the distance, moving along the ridge. My stomach twisted. "Faster," I ordered the trembling officer beside me. And then it happened. We watched it unfold from afar. The vehicle jerked violently, swerved. The driver fought the steering wheel, but gravity had already made its decision. The safari vehicle tipped over the edge of the cliff. Time slowed. It rolled once, twice, then disappeared into the valley below with a violent crash that echoed through the wild. Dust rose into the air like smoke after explosion. In my dream, I had been part of the wreckage. This time, I was the witness. I didn't wait. I jumped out of the hijacked vehicle, revolver still clutched in my hand, and sprinted toward the edge of the cliff. Loose stones slid beneath my shoes. When I reached the top and looked down, my chest tightened. The safari vehicle lay twisted like broken bones at the bottom of the valley. Mr. Lungile was thrown several feet away from the wreckage, motionless. The driver too, gone. And then I saw them. Lions, at least 5, circling, slow, curious, drawn by blood. One massive male lion stepped forward with territorial confidence. He grabbed Liezel by the fabric of her torn blouse and began dragging her away from the wreckage. She was conscious, too weak to fight. Her mother's sobs filled the valley. Something inside me snapped. I fired 2 shots into the air. The sound exploded across the valley. The lions leapt back, startled but not retreating far. I didn't hesitate. I ran down the cliff recklessly, sliding, stumbling, barely aware of my own safety. I kept firing into the sky. Again, again, again. Each gunshot thundered against the hills. The lions finally retreated into the tall grass, irritated but unwilling to challenge the noise. I reached Liezel. She was shaking violently. Her mother was crying, clutching her arm. "I'm here," I said breathlessly. "You're safe. I've got you." Liezel looked up at me through tears and dust. Recognition this time. Not confusion, not fear. Recognition. "You," she whispered weakly. I tore a piece of fabric to wrap around her bleeding arm. I stayed with them, gun still in hand, listening, watching the grass, waiting for the lions to reconsider, waiting for rescue. When the emergency helicopters finally arrived, the noise felt unreal, as if the world was catching up to what I had already seen. 2 weeks later, Mr. Lungile was buried. The funeral was held at a modest church in the outskirts of Johannesburg. I sat quietly in the back pew, uninvited, unannounced, just present. The hymns were heavy, the grief heavier. I couldn't stop thinking, if I had been braver sooner, would he still be alive? After the service ended, people gathered outside in clusters of quiet mourning. Liezel stood alone near the church entrance, dressed in black, dark sunglasses shielding her face. She saw me, and instead of surprise, there was something else in her expression. Curiosity. She walked toward me slowly, removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were red but steady. "What else do you know about me?" she asked. The question wasn't playful. It wasn't accusing. It was searching. I held her gaze. "Well, in my dream," I said softly, "you told me you'd like us to hang out in Nice and rent a boat for a week." She blinked. "I told you that?" "Damn right you did." She studied me carefully, processing. "You know what?" she said slowly, a faint smile breaking through grief. "I once told my mom exactly this when she asked how I would love to spend my vacation days with my boyfriend. A pause. We'll talk more about that later. She placed her sunglasses back on. Then she walked away.